Hey, are you here? Well, I asked because, well, it wouldn't be the Paul Leslie Hour without you being here. Paul, by the way, is there, way over there. Welcome to episode number 1028, featuring Sean McNamara, director of the film Reagan. Have you seen Reagan yet? It stars Dennis Quaid as Ronald Reagan and Penelope Ann Miller as Nancy Reagan. The movie Reagan also co-stars Jon Voight and Robert Davi and many others. And the director, Sean McNamara, he's a great guy, easygoing, friendly fella. He's joining us from California, USA. Your host, Paul, conducted the interview from Bucharest, Romania. Hey, you know what'd be great? If you subscribed to Paul's YouTube channel. Yeah, it's a great way to keep up with our completely independent content. And with that, let's hear from Sean McNamara.
Well, Sean McNamara, we're joined by a distance of more than 6,000 miles.
Wow.
Many time zones. It's, let's see, it's 2:00 in the morning here where I am.
Yeah,
But you are on the west coast of the United States. Is that correct?
I am. Yes.
Very good. And for all the people out there who are watching, Sean McNamara is the director of the film, a top movie in the United States right now, Reagan, the Ronald Reagan biopic. And I thought this was such an interesting thing. This is the 40th film of yours, the 40th president, Ronald Reagan. There's a lot of cool little things like that. So first of all, congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Sean, why did you want to make this film, Reagan?
Well, Howie Klossner, who had worked with me on Soul Surfer, sent me the script to Reagan, and I was just blown away by it. First of all, I loved the way in through the eyes of an ex-KGB agent. And right away, I saw Jon Voight playing that part. And I just thought, wow, telling the Reagan story from the point of view of the Russians is very original. I just had never seen or heard of anything like that. Then I have an odd connection to Reagan. I had nobody in the business when I was growing up. I was a paper boy. My parents were teachers. My sisters are teachers. I used to have to deliver the paper to Disney, but my mom would always say, why don't you just knock on the door at Disney? And I was like, I don't know how it works, but I know it doesn't work that way. But a buddy of mine's dad was the director of the Academy Awards. So every year when I was in high school, hey, get me a meeting with your dad. And he'd say, yeah, sure, whatever. And then I went through high school, never got the meeting. But when I got to college at Loyola Marymount, he finally acquiesced, and I got a meeting with Marty Pacetta Sr. And I go into his Beverly Hills offices, and he's like talking to Bob Hope on one hand and some big star on the other. And then he finally looks at me and he goes, kid, what are you doing here? And I go, well, I'm looking for a job. And he goes, well, what do you do? And I'm totally unprepared for a question like that. So I said, well, I play in a rock band. I plug in microphones. And he goes, audio, that's for you. And I was like, I had never even heard the term like audio. I just knew like guitars and microphones. But the next thing I know, there's a black limousine driving into my driveway. I get on an airplane and fly to Washington, D.C., and I'm plugging in microphones for Reagan's inauguration. So it's just a bizarre story, but completely 100% true. My first job in the entertainment industry was doing audio for Ronald Reagan's inauguration.
Yet another one of those little interesting connections.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what's going through your head. How old were you when you were at this monumental?
I was 18 years old. Like, I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew at that point that I loved film because, when I was 12, family trip to Ireland, my dad bought me a Super 8 camera, and I would just shoot little movies on the reel. I didn't know editing. I would, point it at one person, then run over and point it at the other person, or I would just do whatever I could. But I had the film bug. And I remember playing the little films I made for my classes, and everybody clapped. And, then I really had the bug, and I could get out of certain homework assignments by making movies. Before you knew it, I was just like, let me go to film school. and I got a scholarship to Loyola Marymount University. And there I was, just making little Super 8 films now at the college level and working in audio because of my buddy's dad.
You've said that Ronald Reagan was the first president that you voted for.
He was. I grew up in a traditional Irish Catholic family, Democrats. We had a picture of the Pope on the wall, and we had a picture of John F. Kennedy. That's kind of the house that I grew up in. But I remember watching on the news and my mom liking Ronald Reagan. And for some reason, it seemed interesting. I knew nothing about him, nothing about his history. But that's why I voted for him when I was 18 years old. And so, with the idea of then being able to go to the inauguration was like a dream come true. Like I didn't even know what it meant, but I thought it was like destiny to go to that. And here we are 40 years later. It's my 40th movie for the 40th president of the United States. It seems to all kind of make sense now. But the fun of it is, we mostly know Reagan from when he was the president of the United States. But our film starts in the 1920s when he's Dutch Reagan. He's a little kid and his dad's an alcoholic. His mom's really into religion, Nellie, and she inspires him and to realize that God is with him and that he needs to listen to God and that he has a destiny. So that's the sorts of things you learn on this. And then, of course, we follow him. He's a lifeguard. And then he goes on and he becomes a radio announcer, an actor, and then vice president, and then president of the Screen Actors Guild, and then kind of retires a little bit. And then he runs for governor of California and he wins. And he does 2 terms there. And then he retires again. And then he runs for president and he loses. And he retires again. And then he comes back in 1980 and 2 terms of presidents. There were great times. There were bad times. And then we follow it into the 90s when he has Alzheimer's and finally passes. But it is I think, a really nice autobiography of his whole life. And it's more about his love story, his faith in God, less about the politics of it all. But I mean, we touch on a little bit of everything in this movie.
Everybody out there can go to Reagan.movie. That's a good source for more information about what we're talking about today. I watched this clip from the Today Show. I just thought it was such a great media piece with Dennis Quaid and Penelope Ann Miller. And I'm hoping you can tell us, what was it like to watch Dennis Quaid become Ronald Reagan?
Well, I go way back with Dennis. I did a film called Soul Surfer with him back in 2010, and he's just a consummate actor. We taught him how to surf, and like in 2 days, he picked it up and he was surfing all over the island. It was fantastic. So, of course, when we got him to Reagan, he is such a consummate actor. He learned all of the speeches. Like we'd find them on YouTube and we would transcribe them. And we might only need like a little small part of the speech, a sentence, a paragraph, but he would learn the whole thing. Then he'd also, we studied like when he was in the 40s and he talks like this, I think democracy can handle it. They talked higher because he was a younger man. And then it was more lower when he became president. And then, he was, I think, 66, 67 when we shot it, and Reagan was 69. So he was able to get into that register down here. Well, my fellow Americans. And we studied each part, and to watch him just, become Ronald Reagan. And we didn't want to be an SNL sketch. So we were very careful that you are watching Dennis Quaid with just little affects of Ronald Reagan's character. But when he does those so beautifully, and the way he says the speeches and the way he talks to his beautiful wife, Nancy, he slowly starts becoming Ronald Reagan for you. And then there's another actor, an actress, Penelope Ann Miller, who plays Nancy, again, just does incredible research and read all of Nancy's books. And even Ron Jr. says without Nancy, there would be no President Reagan. And then the other third one, the thing that hooked me into the script was the KGB spy. And I've done a lot of films with Jon Voight. And I said, John, would you come over and do this? And he's going, yeah, I'd like to do it. So he was just perfect for that. He did his research. He brought in the Christianity that was over there in Russia and knew that Mikhail Gorbachev's grandmother was a Christian woman. And so it was just those three at the top of the cast were fantastic.
Well, speaking of Jon Voight, he is a real favorite of mine. And it just seems like every movie he's in, I end up enjoying. What is he like? What is Jon Voight like the guy?
Jon Voight, the guy, is just fantastic. He also is a consummate actor. He gets the script early and is doing notes and stuff. But he's just a friendly, nice, happy guy. When I've done other films with him, my kids were there, and he'd get down on his hands and knees and play with my 3 and 4-year-olds. This was 10 years ago. But it was wild to see that he's just such a nice guy. He loves characters. He loves to make the script great. That's kind of his business. It's not just making his character great. He wants to make sure the film is successful by being a really good script. So together we get that in there.
How do you make people feel comfortable when they're on set, but at the same time, it's something where people have to be alert?
Well, first of all, I'm into rehearsals. So before we shoot a movie, I get the actors there at least a week before. So while they're doing their fittings and we're doing camera tests and stuff, we'll spend 2 or 3 hours a day. First of all, we do a big table read and we break bread after that, and we hear the script, and then we eat together and we ask questions. And then I go with each actor and we go through their scenes, first around a table, like on, say, a Monday. And then on Tuesday, I get a big, meeting room at a hotel, and we put chairs together and we start acting it out. Oh, what about this? What if we try that? Wouldn't it be funny if you did this? So that's what makes them comfortable, because by the time we get to the set, we've already gone through the script, made changes to it if we're going to do that. We've already rehearsed it. We've physicalized it. So that literally all that's left is to shoot it. So that relaxes them a lot. If the locations are nearby, I'll say, hey, let's go to lunch, and everybody jump in the truck and we'll go look at the locations. So they start to feel everything. And once they put their costumes on, that's about the thing to get them there. Other than that, I do shoot fast, and the actors like that, take one, sometimes we'll shoot the rehearsal, because I've been there before when we weren't rolling and some magic happened and we didn't capture it. So I say, look, if it's terrible, we won't show it, but let's shoot the rehearsal, and then we'll do a take 1 and take 2 usually. And these actors are the best. I mean, they just knock it out of the park every time. And there's just the subtlety and just like when you look in Jon Voight's eyes, there's just so much going on behind his eyes. And you get drawn into his gaze, and it's just amazing. But to me, the relaxing thing is all in the rehearsal and just getting them ready for the day of shooting.
Something that I just can't wait to ask you about this. I'm a huge music fan,
Yeah.
and if anybody looks at the soundtrack for this film, you are going to see. I mean, you want to talk about eclectic. Everything from Gene Simmons of Kiss fame.
Yeah.
And then you will have a never before heard Bob Dylan track.
Well, he recorded it for us. He did a cover of Don't Fence Me In from the 1930s. And he's just brilliant at that. And we use him in the closing credits, a very nice place to put it. But we also use Gene Simmons from Kiss, one of my favorite bands growing up in the 70s. And his voice has matured, and he does it in the scene at one of the SAG events, and you hear his voice in the background, and it's fantastic. And but we also use, I don't know if you know this, Chip Taylor wrote Wild Thing, and that's Jon Voight's brother.
Right.
And so I just said, we got to get Wild Thing in this movie. So we got it, and that was just fantastic. And it is fun, but when we go through all the periods, we use music from the periods too. And we had Scott Stapp from Creed, and he's played Frank Sinatra, so he's in there too. So you're right; it is very eclectic, but it's amazing.
Well, Bob Dylan is such an elusive character. How did you all get him to? How did that happen?
I wish I could take the credit. Our producer, Mark Joseph, somehow got his attention, showed him the movie, and he loved the movie. So he said, I'll do a song for you for the end of the movie. And that's how it happened. We're just blessed to get him.
Wow, that's awesome. I was looking at this site, Rotten Tomatoes, and the thing is, the people who are going to see this movie, it seems like unanimously they love it, but the critics haven't been quite as kind. Does that matter to you at all?
Not really. I mean, just my career with the critics have always been, if you look at like a Rotten Tomatoes thing, between 45 and 55. Like I'm in the middle. Half the people like what I do, half the people don't like what I do. And I'm not sure why. I mean, a lot of my stuff is faith-based, faith adjacent, and there's just something about that gets under their skin. And I feel bad about that. But I make the film for the people. And I've been going to the screenings. We had about 60 screenings before the premiere. was at the premiere, but more importantly, I went to the movies and bought a ticket like everybody else and watched the crowds. You just get emotional at the right places, laugh, be crying at the end, standing up and giving a standing ovation at the end. That's been consistent with every screening, and I'm blown away by that. So, it doesn't feel great that some of the critics don't like it, but I go, it's not the film for you. Go, to another film if you believe in that critic. But if you want a film that makes you look at a time in our history and the story of a great man who, whether you like him or hate him, you'll learn something about him, because it's not just the presidency, it's the span of a whole man's life. I don't think the critics that don't like it understand that there's a bigger picture going on. I think some of them are younger and weren't alive when Reagan was here, so they didn't know that aspect. Like, one of the storylines that I really love and that it's important for me and I want audiences to take away is that, we fight like heck up here on the Hill, but at 6 o'clock, we're just a couple of Irishmen having a drink. And that's Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They were at it with each other to get the bills passed and policy changes, but they still could be friends. And I just feel like that's what we need most of all. People have to be friends.
Very well said. On the note of faith, I'm hoping you can tell us about this. It's a faith show, Shadrach.
Yeah. Well, Shadrach I did for PureFlix with Sony, and we had made Soul Surfer for Sony, and Rich Peluso called us up and said, do you have any shows? And we called up all our writers and we found Shadrach, and it's kind of like Black Beauty. It's the relationship with a girl and her horse, but she starts out in the city and her dad loses their job and they got to move in with the parents out in the country. And so they start going to church, and she hears the pastor talking about Shadrach, Abednego, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so she's like learning stuff, doing stuff she hasn't gone. Like, clearly they're probably once or twice a year churchgoers, and now they're going every Sunday. And she heard about them coming out of the fiery furnace, so she names the horse Shadrach. And then the episodes are all about, coming out of the fiery furnace. And it's nice. It's not hitting you over the head with religion or faith, but it's a good story. It's just a nice story. And Livy Birch plays the title character, and she's terrific.
And I understand there's also a film of yours coming out. It's called Bow, Artist of War.
Oh, yes. Bow, Artist at War. If you saw Schindler's List, there's a couple who get married in the Plaszow barracks, and we flew over to Israel and got the rights to their story from their kids. And it's an amazing movie, and it's a story of hope, and it takes place in outside of Krakow, Poland, at Plaszow. And it's a love story, and it's going to be released early next year, and from the same company that did Reagan, from Showbiz Direct. And it's going to be amazing. I think there's going to be awards for these actors. They did a stupendous job.
Bow, Artist at War.
Yes.
All right. You have had the chance through this film, Reagan, to learn so much about him, to reflect on him. What do you admire most about this man?
The thing I admire most about Ronald Reagan was he had humor, and he knew how to tell a joke at the right time to break the ice with people, because, he had been doing high, intense negotiations ever since he was a little kid. And then when he was the Screen Actors Guild president, he had to negotiate with all the unions. But he was able to do it with like a smile and a joke, and then got down to business. And he was passionate about what he did. And I just think ultimately in that time, he was going like, we're going to work hard to get what we want, but we can do that and still be friends. And I just think that's what I admired most about him. And I admired the fact, like, growing up, you saw him as an older man, a president. But in the 40s, 50s, he was like fisticuffs. He was a fighter. He carried a gun because people were trying to kill him. Like, he was like a young man trying to make his way in the world. And these are things you didn't know about. You didn't know that he had an alcoholic father or a mother who was so religious to help him through that period. There was so much going on in his life. And it's so great to tell the full autobiography, or just the biography, about his life, and see how that influenced him on being the president of the United States.
Well, I always like to end the interview from a very open-ended kind of thing. We never know who's watching. We never know who's listening. what would you say to anybody who's tuned in with us?
Well, if possible, I'd say please go see Reagan while it's in the theaters. We shot it very cinematically. Christian Sabalt was our DP, and we made it beautiful. It is a gorgeous film to watch on the big screen. And plus, it will help get the word out. The more people we get to go to the movies up front, the better it will do. And we'll be able to make more movies like this about, just really good people of faith, people that we just want to know about. And I just think that would be the first thing. And hopefully you might think about, I don't care who you vote for, whatever you want to do, just do what you need to do, but be friends with people, reach out to people across the aisle, to your neighbors. And let's not live in a world where, if you don't, if you have the same, policies or values that I have, I can't even talk to you. Maybe if you talk to each other, you could teach each other something, and you'll create a kinder, gentler nation again.
Very well said. Well, Sean McNamara, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate you getting me on the show.
All right. God bless.
God bless you too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
We thank you and appreciate you dropping in for the Paul Leslie Hour today. You can help the Paul Leslie Hour in our mission to provide independent media content like this by visiting www.thepaulleslie.com/support. We truly thank you. This is your announcer speaking. Performance of The Entertainer intro song and Corina outro song, courtesy of John Premerano. Well, that's it for today. So until next time, be safe and be good.